Hi there, knife people, hello lady and gentlemen. Tonight I am going to show you partial, almost complete, but still partial disassembly of Benchmade new knife, new for 2024 and their first entry in a 2024 market. This is called Claymore OTF, out the front automatic. And I already did a full review of this knife where I measured a few things and even determined how much pressure is required to actuate this immense switch here. That video will be linked in the very end on the end screen. So I'm an independent knife reviewer, and I am trying to establish a baseline for independent, unaffiliated knife review process. And I'll get into that a little bit later. Plus, if you watch the whole video, there's a little bonus knife included, and it's an interesting surprise. So let's go. First step in disassembling any OTF basically is to de-energize the blade. Some people use the term take it off the track, which is a little bit of a misnomer. It doesn't really come off any tracks. The blade is not off the tracks, it's just not engaging the stop plates or stop gates. You have to be very careful. These are T6, and stripping a screw is largely depending on how much Loctite the production worker at Benchmade decided to dump on a particular fastener. It only needs to be done on one side, unlike the Infidel, which has screws coming in from both sides, which is already an improvement in my book. It's the first time, I promise, I haven't done that yet. Okay, so I make sure the blade stays down. All right, so this construction here, oh no, I'll knock the gate out. So this is what I call stop plates or stop gates. And the challenge with these new Benchmades, they are so focused on centering the blade, even though out of all the OTF users, maybe 1% of them wants that feature or finds any importance in how centered side to side the blade is. They created a very complex assembly with which I have to familiarize myself very quickly here. See, I just lost the second gate, so I might as well take it out. So let's take a look at the blade and frame assembly here. As you can see, it is literally impossible to accidentally knock the blade off these tracks here because it's all held together by a screw. And as you take these locking plates or gates out, please do keep track of their orientation. And even more critical is to not lose the tiny little springs that actuate the gates. And this is the main spring housing, which is capable of moving when you actuate the main switch. And these tabs on both ends catch on the blade assembly, and that motion tensions the main springs while simultaneously unlocking the gates, allowing the knife to fire. The back spacer in this knife carries no functionality because it doesn't have a glass breaker. A small roll pin connects the switch to the main spring housing, and knocking this pin out would be a difficult task, mainly because it would require hammering the roll pin out with a drift pin, and I'm afraid that would damage the plastic switch. And since there is no need for me to clean the springs yet, I am going to leave it all alone. The components here look very similar to those on the shootout, with some minor differences. And to reassemble, I'm going to employ a very simple procedure here. I sometimes use this as a flooring masking tape. It has pretty good adhesive. Just use your best adhering tape for this. The tape is required because otherwise these nuts will fall out when you flip the scale over, and then you won't be able to install the blade and frame assembly. As it is, the nuts need to be protruding about 2.5 millimeters above the scale in order for it to fit. And the first thing to do is to install the back spacer, and then we can bring the blade and frame assembly. And to orientate it correctly, you need to line up the cutouts for the stop gates with the pockets on the scale. Then you drop it in, try not to press on the nuts, and make sure all the nuts are protruding into and above this stainless frame. There should be no relative motion between the stainless frame and Grievery scales. In the end, it should look like this. Now let's take a look at the locking plate or gate, or sometimes they called levers. The front gate on the left and the back gate on the right are different. They're not symmetrical. On one side, both gates have recesses for the tiny springs, and these recesses are orientated outboard, in other words, toward the scales. If you flip the plate on the other side, you will see that the front one has a groove, which is there to enable the sharpened edge to pass through without touching the plate. And this one has some kind of clearance geometry. That is not common on all knives, but here they have it. So to insert the front gate, you need to slide the blade back. It doesn't have to be all the way, but as long as you don't see the edge through this cutout. It is not a bad idea to sort of dry install these plates first without the springs to see how they fit into these pockets, and try it on both sides, front and back. And because the rear plate is a little bit different, I have to figure out which side drops in. And as you can see, the wider flat without that ramp goes down into the scale. And the side with the ramp is orientated upward. Now it's time to install it in earnest. So I first place the spring into the recess, and then I am going to bring the gate in and drop it down part of the way, then compress the spring and drop it all the way in. Now, in this particular case, the gate is not fully settled. It's catching on the protrusion in the pocket there. So I'm using tweezers to turn it a little bit toward me, and now it's fully dropped in. And it's spring loaded. You can see that the spring is in the correct orientation. Here it is. Please take a look. Carefully, try not to disturb what you already have assembled. Rotate the handle so that you can have a better access to the rear gate. And here I already placed the gate in the spring just like I did before. And now I'm going to use a blunt, preferably non-magnetic object to compress the spring. You may have to move the blade assembly forward to give more space for the gate to drop in and go back to compressing the spring right here. All that requires a lot of patience and no force. The most difficult part is behind us, and now I'm going to say a silent prayer to the Greek god of forge, Hephaestus, and the Roman god of forging and weapons, Vulcan. Anyway, now I'm ready to drop in the scale and install the screws. I start with the central screw, and I'm going to work my way around in a counterclockwise direction and in crisscross pattern, much as if I was installing a tire on a truck. This has nothing to do with superstition, but it has everything to do with properly tensioning the assembly. You see that flat plate where the blade rides on, it's not very thick and it's pretty flexible. So if I torque on one side, the other side potentially can rise even inside the scale and maybe disengage the lock gate that I spent so much time installing. And the other thing is I am not familiar with Grievery to the extent where I can predict how it would behave. And so I am taking every precaution to have a completely flat assembly without any additional stresses. I'd rather not induce any more stresses than I have to. And that is a golden rule in everything you do. I wish I could always follow that in life as I do in knife smithing. I started working on knives when I was pretty young, in my preteens, when somebody gifted me a totally illegal in Soviet Union out the side automatic knife that was constructed and pretty well made actually by the inmates in a jail and then exchanged with a guard for cigarettes. The guard happened to be my best friend's brother, so I got the knife. Here, I'm going to pause for a second and show you the knife. So this knife has a 13 centimeter handle and almost 12, I think it's 11.5 centimeter blade, which makes it totally illegal in Russia even today, from what I understand. And I don't know about the Ukrainian law. And there's a sort of pinned in spring, and the pivot is this, riveted pin right here. So it still functions like this. So the spring tensions pretty well. And the push button was of a screw type. So there was a screw head on this side and the button on this side and the spring in between. So it's not trivial. I don't have the button anymore, but look at the design. So first of all, look at the craftsmanship. It's an integral construction, which is not something that was invented by, Riyadh last year. And when it's fully closed, you have the striking angle right here. And these serrations are sculpted with a file. You can see where they sculpted it with a file. It's pretty beat up, having crossed the ocean. And the blade is made out of some kind of carbon steel, and it has some damages along the way, probably made out of a file. And it has a, like a grinder ground, like handheld grinder type fuller here. And wow, it actually has a hollow grind. So I'm wondering if it's not actually a file, but a broken NKVD dagger, or finca, they call them, that somebody got a hold of and made a blade out of. And then there are some features I don't understand at all, like these seemingly stud cutouts and a little hole on the blade. No idea what they're for. They don't appear to have any functionality. If any of my viewers are collectors of Soviet Gulag knives, I would like to hear their opinion. All right, let's go back to Benchmade reassembly. I now torqued the screws. The torque is very low, 8 inch-pounds, 8 to 10 inch-pounds on a T6. I pull and re-engage the blade. Easy peasy. As you just saw, this knife is not easy to reassemble. And the reason it's so complicated is because Benchmade decided it's more important to center the blade in the handle than make a better maintainable or easier to manufacture knife. So where they cheaped out is the materials, because D2 is the most basic of the powder steels, and Grivery is the most basic of the polymers that you can make it out of. I swear, the cheapest car will have an air intake manifold made out of a very similar stuff because it's heat resistant. It's not a bad material, it's just cheap, right? So I'm not afraid to say that, and the reason I'm not afraid to say that, even if Benchmade wanted to give me a sample knife or gift me a knife to test, I would not accept it. We need to have a voice, an independent, opinionated sometimes, but unbiased by affiliations or sponsorships voice that talks about knives the way they are. Good, bad, indifferent, and not trying to sell you a knife. So I would appreciate it if you are not a subscriber, please do subscribe, forward my link to somebody and hit notification bell so you don't miss any of my future rants.